In this video I'm going to show you how to use the Excel workbook for analyzing time series. As you can see in this tab we have three data series, and in this case that's a HRV data for 2007 by Andrew Flatt, which I want to thanks for providing me with the HRV data for analysis. As you can see, I have HRV data, heart rate data in the morning, and ratio between HRV and heart rate, which is used to, if I remember correctly, to get some insight into saturation, whatever that means. And I think you can find more about it in articles by Martin Boucher on HRV provided on my blog. So I have created 400 spots for data, and that's more than a year. Again, any type of data that you regularly collect and store could be used, and that might involve HRV, heart rate, wellness questionnaire, might be jumping assessment, might be anything. By clicking on a chart, we have something that looks weird. It's a chart that gives us some control over how certain things are calculated. Over here you select the data stream. In this case we're going to choose HRV, and I'm going to show you the raw data points. As you can see, it's a heap of dots and lines, and I'm wondering what does it tell you, and that's the whole point, and that's the whole idea behind doing time motion analysis, to give you some insight into the change, degree of that change, and anything related to that. So analyzing this time series, you probably notice some dots are away or below some form of like a average, and that might be taken into account, saying if this, in this case Andrew, is getting a bit overtrained or getting into a shape. Yet again, talking about HRV, there's some sort of controversial saying that drop in HRV is always bad and jump up is always good. But again, I'm not sure how that's true, and we still need more research on it. And according to Joel Jamieson, both might be bad, depending on the type of overtraining and depending on the cycle. Usually, in a first phase of certain training cycle, the HRE gonna drop, which is a result of sympathicus dominans. But in a real overtraining, your HRE actually might jump over your normal values, and that might be related to parasympathetic dominance and parasympathetic overtraining. Again, I'm not going to talk much about it because it's not my area of specialty, but the idea behind it is we need to know what's normal, what's beyond normal, and that's why we're using time series analysis. Again, one thing is to calculate something that's called rolling average. By setting this number, we take last 7 days up to last 14 days of the data. As you can see, the curve is kind of getting smoothed out when it's more days involved, and that's a idea behind a baseline, which we're going to cover a bit later. As you can see, without seeing a lot of data points, we can see a progression by using simple rolling average. And simple rolling average is, for this point, we take the last 7 measurements. For this point, we take last 7 measurement, and as you can see, as we move through the data series, that that window or that box is rolling forward, and that's why it's called that's why it's called rolling average. And it's also used to smooth out the data. Again, these individual data points are like a forest, and sometimes you can get lost by it. And using something simple as rolling average might give you some insight of the forest, and not losing the sight of it for the trees, so to speaking. So we can turn on. This is a progression over time, and these are the data points. Evaluating each data point compared to a rolling average, I'm going to call it baseline for this particular case, but I'm going to refer to a baseline in a matter of minutes on to something else. So one way to analyze it is to get a basic difference between this data point and the rolling average. Again, or we can also use percent change. So it's a difference between these two divided by a baseline in this case, and then rolling average. One problem with it is it doesn't take the variability in a normal responses. One way to deal with it is to use z-scores or standardized scores, and they're pretty easy to calculate. The thing you need beside rolling average is you need to calculate the rolling standard deviation. So it's pretty simple to do it in Excel, and instead of using average for a certain amount of data points, you use the standard deviation, and z-score is basically the difference between the last data point and the average divided by a standard deviation of the rolling average, and we can estimate it by clicking on the daily z-scores. As you can see, they're also pretty hectic, but at least they give us some indication of how much is certain data point away from a normal variability. I've used 3 zones over here based on a bands by Will Hopkins on Cohen D, which is FXI statistic. I simplified them to 2, but you can still make other zones visible pretty easy by going to select data and checking all these bands. Cohen 5, Cohen 6, Cohen 7, those are all bands. But for the sake of simplicity, I didn't show them because the graph gets a bit clumsy. So again, if you look the whole year, you don't see the progression in z-scores, even if they're pretty good way to analyze day to day compared to the rolling average. What we can do is to calculate the rolling average of the z-scores. Same thing as we did with the data points, we can do with the z-scores by calculating the rolling z. Again, this gives us some more longer term progression and might indicate certain changes beyond what's normal. And again, depends if it's going a bit higher up. It might indicate, in the case of HRV, might indicate parasympathicus dominance or parasympathetic overtraining, and if it's going down, might be sympathicus overtraining or sympathicus dominance. Again, it's beyond my beyond my expertise, so I cannot comment in much more details than that. And I will still maintain my critical thinking until we get more data on this. So that's how we can use the rolling average, the individual z-scores, and the rolling z-score. I'm gonna shut these down quickly. just a couple minutes ago I spoke about baselines. So baseline is something that's a more long term, and it gives us some form of a context of what's being normal and how the other scores deviate from normal stuff or normal range. We calculate the 14 days rolling average. I'm going to decrease it to 7. And baseline, if we click on this one, the gray area, the line, the dark gray line is a baseline. And in this case, I calculate the baseline that start 70 days behind a certain data point. So in this case, it cannot start here because we're gonna go out of screen. There's no data for that one. So this is 70th day, and so the baseline starts here and it lasts 41 days. In this case, baseline is a bit longer than 7 days average, and it doesn't include 7 days rolling average inside of it. So it's basically manipulating the start and the length of the rolling average box, if you can visualize it, so to speaking. The light gray area is the smallest worthwhile change, and it's related to a standard deviation of the baseline. According to Will Hopkins, for individual data, it should be 0.3 to 0.5, depending on. In his earlier works, he referred to 0.5, if I remember correctly, and now he changed it to 0.3. Again, this is related. The smallest worthwhile change for an individual is related to his performance on the competition. So it's beyond me which one to use for day-to-day time series analysis. Again, baseline give us some long-term context of how to evaluate the data points. So as you can see, we can turn off the raw data points, and we get again two curves. This is a 7 days rolling average, and this is baseline and a smallest worthwhile change. What we could do is also calculate the typical error of rolling average, and at the moment it's beyond me how to calculate it. It might involve only using a standard deviation of the rolling average and creating certain error bars, calculated the chances of trivial, beneficial, and harmful change. It's pretty easily done, but again, I'm not sure how it's done for time series data for an individual. The interesting thing with this is that the blue line might reflect something that's acute change, and a change in a gray one might reflect something that's more chronic. We can see application of this in a power meter community. They did something similar to this. They estimate the daily loads by using certain algorithm of the power meter when you are cycling. So you get some certain load per day, and this might be anything from data estimated by power meter, might be a trim score if you're using heart rate, or might be session RP or RP load if you're using subjective indicators. So you use that load and calculate the acute change. That's like a smaller window, usually 7 to 14 days, and you calculate something that's a longer term, more chronic, chronic load. According to the power meter community, they use something that's called relationship between acute and chronic. In this case, acute might reflect fatigue if you're talking about the workloads, and chronic might reflect the fitness, and the ratio between those two might reflect the preparedness to train. I think you can find more about this concept in Kogan's book, Racing, Training and Racing with a Power Meter, which is a pretty good book actually. And you can take a lot of ideas to other sports as well. So again, this is one way to visualize something that's more acute, short term, and something that's more chronic or long term. In the case of research by Martin Bouchet and Laborates, they use first a couple of weeks as a baseline, and they stay with it throughout the year. So you can use this static baseline, and you get a nice line. Again, I'm not sure if this is the right way to do it actually, especially for a more long-term data set. So with a static baseline, the baseline starts from day 1, and it in this case lasts 41 days. You can start playing with this, seeing how it affects the duration of the baseline, how it affects the smallest worthwhile change and baseline average. So one way to compare a rolling average to a baseline might involve magnitude-based statistic and chances of trivial, beneficial, and harmful. But again, it's beyond me how to calculate the typical error for individual in time series. If someone knows or can point me to a right direction, please let me know in the comments. So another way, and this is a lot easier to do, is to get something similar to z-score as we did to a day-to-day data compared to a rolling average. So we compare the rolling 7 days rolling to baseline, and we get the standard deviation of the baseline, and we get the standard deviation of the last 7 days or 14 days or whatever. And pretty similar to z-score, we calculate the effect size, which is also a standardized score, by subtracting baseline from a rolling average and dividing it, in this case, by pooled standard deviation, which is, sort of speaking, a combination between standard deviations of the baseline and standard deviation of a 7 days rolling average. Since the baseline involves more days than or data points than a rolling average, the standard deviation is kind of biased toward the standard deviation. Sorry, the pooled standard deviation is going to be more affected by a standard deviation of the baseline than last 7 days rolling average, because there's more data points in a baseline. Again, that's an effect size, and we can visualize it by clicking on this box. As you can see, it gives us again certain indicators or when the rolling average is beyond baseline. If you can click on a static, the picture is going to change a little bit. Again, this is more art than a science, and choosing the right durations and starting points might involve again more art than anything written on paper. Sometimes the rolling baseline is a wrong idea, especially if you're in a competitive season. So you might choose one static period as a baseline. It might involve some lower volume pre-season work or something like that. Again, it's more an art. So if you choose static one or rolling baseline, we can compare effect size with rolling Z. In this case, they correlate pretty much, as you can see. So again, I don't know which method is better or worse. We might need to do both or just take things into consideration. Again, these are the data for HRV by Andrew Flatt. We can choose the heart rate, and ratio between HRV and heart rate. According to recent paper by Martin Boucher, we need to compare HRV, kind of get a picture of the HRV and HRV against divided by heart rate, because this gives us some indication of a saturation, which might happen when you're getting more fitter, sort of speaking, and HRV is dropping or something like that. I need to definitely reread that paper, and it might also involve time to switch from doing HRV lying down, seated, or standing, depending on the level of the athlete, because that might affect the saturation of the score. Again, check those papers for more info. To sum this up, the goal behind the time series is to get some meaningful data you can use in your daily practices, to see the trends and act accordingly, sort of speaking, to see how each individual is reacting, and to adapt training to his complex biological reaction. Again, it's more art than a science. Choosing the right way to do it is it's a bit complex, and we need to put things into a context. So I urge you to put some of your data, play with it, and see if you get some meaningful data out of it. If you have any further ideas, or if you think I should have done certain things differently, or if I made an error, please be free to leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching.